I guess he did. They surely are. Wow.
Don't call me Shirley.
Oh man. Oh yeah, I don't want to do that.
I'm waiting for my cue from our conductor. Okay, there we go. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out on this misty afternoon on Thursday. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to our story about what we, have done as a task force to site a wastewater treatment plant in the town of Rockport. We'll go through sort of the work that we did to get to where we are, and then we'll talk a little bit about the results from an engineering perspective, and then we will move into some of the financial end of it and take a look at that, and at the end we'll conclude with questions. The purpose of this meeting, as a public meeting if you will, is to gain input from you all to the task force prior to us making a recommendation to the board next Monday, as far as what we think we should do from construction of this WRRF. So that's the purpose of this here, and we'll get to that, the question side of it at the end. From an introductions perspective, my name is Bill Bowe. I'm a resident of Rockport, and I'm a retired environmental engineer, or environmental geologist, I should say. Sorry about that for these engineers. Geologist that worked in the environmental consulting business for about 35 years, and I worked a bit on projects like this one, permitting them and helping construct them and that sort of thing. So that's one of the reasons that I'm on this particular task force. So with that, I'd like the others to introduce themselves as well, starting with Sam Clark.
Hi, I'm Sam Clark. I'm a resident of Rockport and a member of the planning board. I have 20 years experience building, installing, operating, maintaining water and wastewater systems, and about 15 years experience working with membrane technology. That's why I'm here.
I'm Doug Cole. I've lived in Rockport since 1985, and during that time I've served on multiple committees, boards, and task force, and I'm on here sort of as the man on the street to keep an eye on the engineers.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Colmar. I'm a resident of Rockport. I've been a practicing civil engineer for 48 years, still work. Did a lot of engineering, design, construction, operations, and maintenance of horizontal facilities, and pleased to be a part of this to contribute in a small way. I'm the impatient engineer on the task force.
Absolutely. Brent?
I'm Brent Bridges with Woodard & Curran. I'm an engineer, practiced in the state of Maine over the last 35 years, doing water and wastewater systems for the public sector, for municipalities. Our offices are in Bangor and Portland, and we've been doing work in Rockport for the last 20 or so years.
Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sure. For those who don't know me, my name is John Duke. I'm your town manager.
And I'm Denise Munger, Chair of the Rockport Select Board. Welcome, everyone.
Yep. So thank you for coming. One of the things we're going to talk about a little bit here today is got some terminology-related stuff, and some of these acronyms or terms just come off of our tongue without even thinking about it. So rather than force you to remember, well, is he talking about there? I thought I'd go through a handful of them that you may hear more and more frequently than normal. So the first one is the whole thing of what's called a WRRF, a WRRF, and it really just stands for a Water Resource and Recovery Facility. It's just a fancy way of saying wastewater treatment plant. In about 2013, the phrase got coined because nobody liked to use those words, and so they said, let's call it a WRRF. So that's what we're calling it. That's the gist of that. We talk about the PER quite a bit. One of the things that we had engaged in with Woodard Curran here over the past several months is constructing a revised or a new PER, and you'll hear about why it's new here in a few minutes. But the PER, the preliminary engineering report, talks about the locations that we considered, talks about the technology we considered, and the estimates of probable cost and a variety of other things. Gallons per day, GPD. When you're talking about wastewater treatment, people talk about the number of thousands of gallons per day that the plant treats. And that makes a difference when you're talking about plant capacities and the ability to send X gallons per day one direction versus another direction. For instance, right now in the town of Rockport, we treat approximately 89,000 gallons per day. About 2/3 of that goes to Camden, about 1/3 of it goes to Rockland. You'll hear more on that. So that gallons per day thing. Capacity is what I just mentioned, is how much wastewater in terms of volume can a plant handle or will allow us to send them. Capacity is a big thing in this particular business. Collection system, that relates to the pipes and the pumps in the town that pushes that wastewater to the treatment plant. So you may hear the word collection system, and we're really just talking about pipes and pumps and whatever it takes to get that wastewater from your home to the wastewater treatment plant itself. And last one, and certainly not least, is the word outfall. Outfall is the pipe that leads from the treatment plant to where you're going to dispose of the treated water. And that's a very important consideration. It's one thing to get the waste to the plant, then you have to get that clean waste elsewhere. And that's an important component of how, when you're planning construction of a facility like this, all the outfalls have to be permitted by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. And it's a highly regulated thing, and that's what an outfall is. So why are we here this afternoon? I didn't change this from last night. There's a number of different reasons. The first reason is high cost. We are renters on treatment systems that are owned by others. We rent space in Camden, we rent space in Rockland. Right now, and as you all may all feel it in your wastewater bill, we pay about 40% or so of a premium to be a renter. And you can look at your wastewater bill and see it and understand that it's higher than what you might have expected. And for those of you who've been here forever, that's one thing. Others of us that have moved even from Camden to Rockport, they've seen a market increase in their bill. So that's one of the reasons we're here, is high cost. Second reason is that in March of 2022, Camden asked us to leave. They gave us a deadline of leaving by March of 2026. So that's Camden's perspective on whether or not they want to continue to allow us to send our wastewater their direction. So we have that in writing. Camden's also suggested that they're not going to give us any additional capacity. We're currently pumping about 65,000 gallons per day to Camden. They don't want to give us any additional capacity. Where that comes into play is if we want to grow as a town, and for instance, workforce housing out Route 90 or wherever that might be, that requires a public sewer system, that requires us to have additional capacity limits at a plant that is willing to treat it. Camden has said no more, so we're stuck with what are we going to do? So that's a barrier for us to be able to at least attempt to develop additional property out, for instance, Route 90. And the last one is that we have no contract. Both 30-year agreements with Camden and Rockland have expired. 1990 for Camden, 2020 for Camden, and 2022 with Rockland. So we're essentially working without a contract, which allows Camden in particular to charge us whatever they think they would like to charge us. We are not contractually bound to, we have to pay it. And we've seen about a 50% increase in the rates from Camden in the past couple, 3 years. And it's reflective of some of the concerns we have as far as the financials surrounding how we as a town can sustain that into the future. So that's why we're here this afternoon. So the primary objective for this, and I'll go through some other things here in a few minutes, but when you look at constructing a WRRF, a wastewater plant somewhere, there's a lot of different variables that have to be looked into. The first one is location. We picked out 4 different locations you'll hear about a little bit this afternoon. The next one is technology. What kind of a plant you're going to build? What is the way that you're going to treat that waste? The third one is cost. There's both treatment system cost. In other words, you can put a conventional sludge plant anywhere, cost X dollars, but it's a different cost to prepare the site in order to accept that. If we put it at, Kramer Park, which none of us are advocating, don't worry, it's one cost. If you put it down at Glen Cove Park at the other end of town, it's a different cost because you have to build pipelines. So cost comes into play. Then you have feasibility. How easy is it to construct in that area? Do you have geotechnical concerns? Is the soil underneath, capable of supporting a facility like this? So there's a feasibility aspect of it. And there's also a risk. If you put a plant somewhere, what sort of long-term risk are you, potentially accepting? I'll give you a sort of a simple example. If we put the plant up at Kramer Park, you know that we have a very steep bank going into the Goose River. If over the next 20 or 30 years the Goose River changes its course, starts to erode that bank, and that bank begins to collapse because it's already at what we call the angle of repose. It's at its natural angle. If you dig out from underneath that, it's going to steepen, and the top is going to erode in. That's a long-term risk, if you will, if we were to go there. And there's all sorts of others, but that's just sort of a simple example. So the gist of it is you have to take these 5 variables and put them in a barrel and turn it around a few times and then figure out, okay, how does this all come out based on all these different issues that we have to consider. So why are we here, these 4 volunteers, this WRRF Exploration Task Force, as it's called? It was established back in April of last year, so it's almost been a year that we've been working. And this was the original language as far as what was in the select board language when they approved it, essentially to establish a foundation with understanding, if you will, with Camden's issues that we've had, which is one of the main reasons we're here. We did not get involved in the negotiations or discussions with Camden. We stayed aware of it, so we understood what was going on. But as a task force, it was not our charge to get in the middle of that, and we did not. The second was to solicit community input on these alternatives, and that's what we're doing today, okay? The third one is to get more in the details and the weeds technically. And we started off with some initial information for the first 3 months from May, June, and July of last year. We reviewed the existing presentations that some of you may have seen. We reviewed an initial preliminary engineering report that was done in March of 2022, so 2 years ago at this point. That was the one that was recommending the use of Kramer Park and discharge into the Goose River. And we looked at that data and really kind of came to the conclusion in the next 3 months that we really needed an updated version of that what we had, before us wasn't sufficient for us to do our job. So the town itself engaged Woodard Curran through Brent here to construct a new PER. We started that in October of 2023, just a few months ago. And Woodard and Curran worked at the direction of the task force. The town participated in most of the meetings. They were aware of what we were doing, but the task force itself really kind of directed Brent's activities. We wrote the request for proposal and reviewed the reports and all that sort of thing. So at this point, the responsibility lies with us to take that information from you all, then before we go to the board next Monday and give them our recommendation, which we will share with you later on. So what was the scope of the PER that Brent's firm put together? We asked them to evaluate 4 locations: Kramer Park, Public Works, Penn Bay Medical Center, which popped in during the process, and also Glen Cove Park. So those were 4 different locations we asked them to evaluate. We also asked them to evaluate 3 different technologies. There's something called a membrane bioreactor that Brent will talk about, this fancy thing of submerged attached growth bioreactor. We'll call that the Lincolnville technology because that's what they're doing up there, and conventional activated sludge. We asked them for development estimates of probable cost. What's it going to cost us to put this thing in? We asked them to do a feasibility analysis and a risk evaluation. Again, that's things I talked about earlier. Can you do it? And if you do it, what are the risks associated with it? And most importantly, we did not ask Brent to develop a specific recommendation. We didn't want our engineering firm to say this is the right answer. We asked for all the facts and the matrix and the inputs, which we're taking from them and you all and our time that we spent on it to come up with a recommendation rather than just feed the recommendation from the engineer to the town. So that was the scope of the PER. So what else did we do as part of that? We did site visits to all 4 locations. We drove in, walked around, sniffed the dirt, looked at the nearby homes or the steep banks or whatever it happened to be. We went to all 4. We also made visits to each of the technologies. We went up to Bridgeton to look at a conventional activated sludge facility. We went to Oxford to look at a membrane bioreactor. And we went up to Lincolnville and toured their submerged attached growth bioreactor system that they have operating there. If any of you have been to Lincolnville, as you drive up, I'm sure you've all been there, but as far as driving up, as you start to get into town, if you take that really hard right to go to the Lobster Pound, that wedge of property, that's where the Lincolnville system is. And if you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know what it was. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking at now. That's a small version. They're only producing about 25,000 or treating 25,000 gallons per day. We're going to ultimately have a system that will probably produce somewhere around 200, 225,000. So it's small, but it's the same thing, same kind of technology. We met with the Maine DEP to talk about permitting. Remember, I talked about that outfall. You have to get a permit to discharge water in the state, whether it's a wastewater plant or a groundwater remediation system or stormwater discharge, whatever it is, you have to get it permitted. And the process is very, very rigorous. And we realized early on that the ability to get a permit to discharge into the Goose River just wasn't going to happen. And the state was encouraging us, well, you just need to go to the ocean, Penobscot Bay. And so the options that we're looking at now includes going to Penobscot Bay, various different locations. We met with Maine Water out at their facility up at Mirror Lake. And we learned a little bit about their technology. So they use a membrane bioreactor. It's a little different because they're taking mostly clean water and making it really clean so we can drink it. But the technology is in effect the same kind of thing. And if you use an MBR for wastewater, you're taking a whole lot dirtier water and making it clean, but the technology is the same. Plus, they generate a little bit of wastewater themselves, about 10,000 gallons per day. And if we do this Route 90 extension out from past the high school out to the intersection with Route 17, which we are going to be advocating for, they're going to connect to that, and we will accept them as a customer of about 10,000 gallons per day. Given that we're currently doing about 90,000 gallons per day, that's almost 10% of our current flow. That wastewater is basically a product that comes from their treatment of the water, and now they currently spray it as irrigation in the summer months, and they make snow actually in the winter. They have to do that pursuant to a permit, and they have to monitor wells to make sure it's not getting back into Mirror Lake. It's not really contaminated stuff, but it's a process for them. So if they're able to off that wastewater to us, they would be perfectly happy doing that. We met with Penn Bay Medical Center leadership. Penn Bay came into the process, a few weeks or months or whatever it was into, our thinking. They already treat water at Penn Bay Medical. They have a system that used to function as a fully functional wastewater treatment system that would discharge to Glen Cove. And then in the early 90s, when they flipped over to Rockland, they dismantled most of it. But currently, they still have to hold all of their wastewater. They generate about 30,000 gallons a day, 25 to 30,000 gallons a day of wastewater. Again, our town is generating 89, so that's a big chunk. And what they have to do, because of Rockland's requirements, they have to store that in a concrete tank in the ground. And if you have ever, I'm sure we've all been to the hospital at one time or another, if you're driving in and you get to that final left turn before you go to the front door, if you hang a right, go down the hill, that's where it is. And it's been there forever. And right now you can walk in there, if you could walk on it. It's a big concrete tank, it's a 50,000 gallon tank. And all day long they accept wastewater, they grind it up a little bit, and then they put it in this tank, and they aerate it all day long so it doesn't stink. Now, if you stand on the grates over the top of it, you can smell it, but it's not horrible. But they store that all day, and at 10 o'clock every night, they flip a switch and they pump it to Rockland. So Rockland's done taking showers and flushing toilets, and their plant is not accepting as much water. They have then capacity to take from Penn Bay Medical. Now, Penn Bay's tank is 50,000 gallons, so they've got about a day and a half of storage. So it has to run and has to function, and that's a pain in the neck for them. And one of the reasons that we're considering Penn Bay Medical is that footprint of property that they have that accepts this current system would fit us just fine. And they're interested, we're interested, we've talked a little bit. They want to sell, we want to buy. In other words, they want to sell it. We feel like we should buy it. Tyson Thornton, I don't think Tyson's here this afternoon, is he? He's been very involved in the discussions. We haven't gotten that far down the road, but we wanted to make sure this is a feasible kind of thing, and it likely is. So we met with Maine Water, and we work with Megan quite a bit on developing some of these economic models that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So that's some of the other stuff we were doing. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brent, and I'm going to have him go through the PER, the technologies, the locations, the cost, some of the risk-associated stuff, and then we'll flip back over to the economics. Is that on? Now push this right there one time. Now hold it. Should. No, you're going to turn it off. There you go.
Am I good? Am I good? That's better?
Yep.
I can't sit and talk about wastewater. I have to stand up, talk about wastewater. So The PER is about 190 pages. I will not do 190 pages of discussion tonight. I promise I won't. I'll just pick up the highlights. So the PER, the first thing I'll say about the PER is, why do you do a PER? Every funding agency that you may want to solicit money from will require a document like this. So in addition to it being a document so that the town can understand what your options are to decide, make decisions, anybody who wants to give you money is going to want to look at this document to make sure it's something they're familiar with and seen before so they can decide if they want to. So it has actually a dual purpose. So what you're seeing here is from north to south, top to bottom, is this is a tax map that shows Rockport. Every colored lot is a lot that's served by sewer. The bottom half of the lot, all of those lots feed into a collection system, pump stations, and go to Rockland. Everything on the top half of the page, same thing. Sewers, pump stations, and pump to Camden. So that is the extent of your existing system. All the colors are just what a drainage area is, what a bunch of houses that tie into a pump station, that go to a pump station, that take it out of town, either north or south. When Bill talked about looking at alternatives, one of the things that's nice to do is look at a lot of different areas of town. And so when we talked about at the top, Kramer Park, at the bottom, Glen Cove Park, and then close to the bottom, Penn Bay Medical, and then Public Works, 4 different locations throughout town that currently are near your wastewater collection system that would give us good alternatives to look at as we're evaluating options. And so 4 different locations that provide different opportunities and different constraints. And so those are the 4 areas that we looked at as far as looking at alternatives. This is really a fascinating drawing for me. This is a process flow diagram. And so each of the 3 processes, if we're talking about treating wastewater, they're a little bit alike and a little bit different. This is the Lincolnville project. This is the submerged activated growth bioreactor. What happens is there's 3 parts to any wastewater system. The left-hand side of this page is basically where wastewater comes into a plant and you screen out anything that's a rag or a wipe or a rock or something that's not liquid. And so you want to keep all those things out of the system. So the left-hand side of any process is a bunch of screens or filters, so you keep all the solids out. The end of the system, the far right of the page, is where you disinfect clean water. You've done treatment and you disinfect it. In all of the cases, all of the processes that we looked at, we are not doing any chlorination for disinfection. All of these 3 processes are looking at ultraviolet light for disinfection. So no chemicals, just ultraviolet light. You pass the clean water, past ultraviolet light, discharge into the ocean. That's the disinfection process. So all of these systems have the same front end and basically the same back end. Where they are different is in the middle. One thing that's similar is they all use a biological process. There's not a bunch of chemicals you feed in to treat wastewater. They all grow bacteria, grow bugs that attach themselves to the wastewater such that you can filter out all of the bad things and make them solids and allow all the liquid to go through. And so they're all a little bit different. This is the SAGB system. This is the project that is in Lincolnville that Bill talked about, right across from the ferry terminal. And so Lincolnville, 25,000 gallons a day, looks like that. And so as you go down over the bank, all of these tanks, the nice thing about this system is most of it's buried tanks in the ground. So you don't see a lot of structures up above the ground. All the processes can happen in these buried tanks. Wastewater comes in, sorts itself out, settles itself out, gets treated, and then discharged into the ocean right next to the ferry terminal. And so this is the Lincolnville project. The only building on the site is the one you see on the left. And all that has is electrical controls, the ultraviolet bulbs for disinfection, the blower. All of these systems have air. Air grows bugs, and bugs are good for wastewater treatment. And so all of these systems have a blower system. And so this is the site. We didn't get grass on it. This has been up and running for about 2 years. So Conventional activated sludge. By the way, the last system has been around in process, used in communities for about 20 years routinely. So it's not brand new. So we had a little bit of history. Conventional activated sludge. This has been around since the beginning of time. This is your traditional, when you drive around the state and you see big tanks and domes and things like that that are treatment plants, most of the time you're seeing a conventional activated sludge plant. And the only difference there is a lot of big tanks that allow all this process to happen. A lot of moving the wastewater around into tanks, blowing air into it, growing bugs, solids come out, same sort of processes. Takes a little more space to do something like this. But everyone knows how to do it. It's been around for years and years and years. And the project we just started up in Bridgeton, Maine, this is a 120,000 gallon a day project. This is what the tanks look like. Bridgeton was a little bit different because most of the plants in the state you'll find with a series of tanks kind of sprawled around on a campus. We compressed it in Bridgeton and put every process in one big tank, a little bit unique. It's still activated sludge. So this is the Bridgeton site. That's the tankage itself as far as the process. The rest of it just showing the buildings. There's a couple of buildings there. On the right-hand side, that is the screening and laboratory. Left-hand side are all of the controls and operations and electrical. Again, Bridgeton, 120,000 gallons a day. Just got built. It started taking wastewater January 2nd. So pretty new. As you can see, snow on the ground as they're under construction. So that's the Bridgeton site. That's conventional activated sludge. Last one is a membrane bioreactor, and Sam talked about his experience in those, and we went to Maine Water, which actually has the same kind of membrane technology. Difference here in this technology is that as opposed to relying on a lot of tanks and bugs and growth and treatment to happen, you use filters. It's basically a membrane that you're passing the wastewater through a membrane with very small openings that will hold solids on the backside and allow water to pass through, and that water that passes through is ultra, ultra clean. So clean, as a matter of fact, that you probably could allow it to be discharged without disinfecting it. It is so clean, and that's one of the reasons this technology is very, very, a lot of people like this technology. And this is the project that we just, it's about 5 years now. This is Oxford, Maine. So just down from the casino on Route 26. And so this is the inside. The one, all where you can see the workers are, everything out of that is the tanks that are allowing the treatment to happen. This is one building. This is the treatment plant. So when you go to Oxford, that is the treatment plant. That has got electrical, pumps, aeration, laboratory. It's one building. Because of what you see on the right, it's sited in a neighborhood. And so we had to be really careful about what it looked like and how it looked. Everything's functional. But that is the entire treatment plant. And that is a sized right now for 150,000 gallons a day. However, we put components in so we can expand that up to 250,000 gallons a day if the need happens in the future. So we built a little bit less, but allowed us to expand it should growth come. Very easy to do with that kind of technology. Site layouts. Looking down on each site, I've just got a couple of sites. I didn't go through 12 of them, just a couple of site layouts. So Public Works. If you look at this, the long rectangle in the middle is the Public Works site. You can see in the middle the existing buildings that are there for Public Works. What you're seeing there in the tan is if we were to put the Lincolnville project sized to accommodate your flows, that's what it would look like. That's the sizing of the Lincolnville project on that property. If we were to put the Bridgeton project on that property, it would be a little bit bigger. Again, about an acre is what all of these take. This takes a little bit more because there's a lot more tankage, a lot more things to be able to be placed on the site, so it's a little more difficult on smaller sites. So just a couple of examples of that. And this would be a membrane. A little bit tighter configuration, but a membrane site. So just to see, this is the overall parcel. That's about all it would take up as far as doing it. We also went down and said, let's put a couple more places. So this is Penn Bay site, so the hospital itself. As Bill described, when you go down and back, this is the site of their existing Their existing facility is right there. We'd be replacing their existing facility with that, and this is what's showing the Lincolnville project right there on that facility, would be right in that location. And then if we had a membrane, it would look something like that. We just did a couple of examples. The last thing I'll talk about is whenever you're choosing a different site, right now you pump to Rockland and you pump to Camden. If you were to put a plant at any one of these sites, some of the existing sewers will work and some of them got to be reversed. And so sometimes you've got to pump it to the new spot. And so for each of those, for instance, if this is the middle of the page, that's Public Works, you'd see in some of these, where you see in the aqua, we'd have to do a little bit more piping to be able to get it to that site. It doesn't go there now, so we'd have to put some piping in the ground to do it. The one thing that the town has done in their recent projects, in some of the work they've done, is they've allowed some of their installations to go both ways. And so when they put force mains in the ground and put pump stations in the ground, it's just a matter of changing out the pumps in order for it to go the other way. And so a lot of the recent work that's been done has been done with the mind to be flexible enough to be able to go both ways. And then this is just down at Penn Bay, what some of that work would be done. So cost, one example, so this is the Lincolnville project. If we built Lincolnville, sized right for Rockport, it would be a little more than $16 million. So just the plant itself. If we put that project, if we put that facility at Public Works, just to change out the pipes and flows and pumps to get it now to go to Public Works as opposed to Rockland and Camden, it would cost another $5 million just to get those pipes flowing the right way. If you went to Penn Bay, it's close to $8 million. It's more pipes going down to the southern part of town, so a little bit more money to be able to do it. And so trying to get a complete picture of the cost. We also looked at O&M. They're roughly the same cost. And so each one of these facilities, whether you start out with lower flows or you end up being higher flows in the end, it's a two-person facility for each of them, just for redundancy. People need to take time off. So each of them, we've planned having 2 people operate any one of these facilities. And so the costs are relatively the same. And then cost summary, we've just summarized all of them, all of the technologies, all of the locations, what the capital cost would be. That capital cost is not only the plant itself, but the infrastructure to get it to the plant, and then operational costs. I won't dwell on this, but as Bill said, we talked about the feasibility of each of these sites and plants and all the criteria that we went through to be able to come up with comparisons. And then impact. So feasibility, impact of all those things to make sure we considered every potential situation for each of those sites and each of those technologies. And then came up with the total risk. So kind of compared the two to kind of see how they compare to each other. And that's where we left our work.
I can't sit anymore either, so. So this is a summary again of the costs associated with each of those various scenarios that Brent just talked about. So we did from that table, took these costs and then stewed them in and did a financial analysis, and I'll thank Megan for all the hard work that she put in on that. I'm reporting her news for the most part, so if you have any hard questions, I'm going to give the microphone to her. So we modeled though multiple scenarios, and we'll see what those scenarios are. We also made very conservative assumptions regarding TIF revenue and grant opportunities. We did not assume, for the purposes of this analysis, that we'd be getting any grants. We know that's not true. We may, we actually just met this afternoon and talked a little bit about probably in the $2 to $5 million, we think we can get some grants, some low interest loans. We've got some existing funding. So the funding piece that you're going to look at here is very, very conservative in general, okay? So what were the scenarios that we modeled? In other words, if we're going to go forward with this, what are the different options that we have? The first one, the first bullet, is just getting a new contract with Camden and Rockland. And we've seen escalations in the past few years. We had to predict user rates, and we had to assume we would get a capacity increase. And I talked earlier about the fact that Camden has suggested that they want us out and we can't get any more capacity. But if we're able to negotiate that, this would be, that's a potential option for us. The next two bullets, the first one talks about the cost. In other words, we're going to have to pay X. Are we going to put membrane bioreactor at Kramer Park? Are we going to put a Lincolnville-type system at the hospital? There are different costs. So we had to look at those different costs. And if we only build the plant, or we're calling the WRRF, it's $22 to $29 million in capital expenditure. The cheapest one is Kramer Park, the most expensive is Glen Cove, and in the middle are Public Works and the hospital. Then we talked about, okay, what if we put in the Route 90 expansion? That's about a $9 million additional cost on top of the WRRF itself. And then the third component is the operating and maintenance, or O&M cost that Brent mentioned, and that's within $10,000 or $400,000 for all of the different, so we just use $400,000 into the future. So that's the cost side. Then you have the revenue side. So the revenue is based into two different buckets. Through the user rates, which is what we all pay per 100 cubic feet that exits our house, okay? So they meter our water use, and that becomes our sewer use. So that under a user rate perspective, it's a volume calculation. The next part is debt service, when we borrow money in order to do whatever, whether it's pumps to the existing collection system we have in Rockport, or we build a new system, we have to borrow money, and that becomes part of debt service. So debt service plus user rates, that's how you get to the revenue side to offset the cost. So we modeled 5 different cases, or 4, I should say, of the WRRF, plus the 5th being the new contract with Camden and Rockland. The base case we modeled was just replace the existing 89,000 gallons a day. That's the base case, current flow only, no Route 90 expansion, that's it. The second one, and these words of expected and potential, that's just words so we could differentiate them. The expected case is the base, our existing stuff, plus we'll expand a pipeline or the sewer line past the high school out to Route 17. That's about a $9 million capital expenditure. We will, by doing that, pick up 10,000 gallons per day from main water. We'll also pick up additional flows eventually from the Route 90 folks that the line passes in front of. The experience that Brent will tell you around the state is that once you have a line in front of you, typically absorption within about 10 years is about 90%. We assumed 70. So that gives us an additional 35,000 gallons per day on top of the main water of 10, plus our existing 89, gets us to about 134. Then you start to get into additional cases of potential and best of whether or not this barrier that we're removing to residential development out Route 90 for this workforce housing we've all been talking about, right now the lack of a sewer system is preventing that. There's other barriers and cost and that sort of thing, but the lack of a sewer system is one of the big barriers. If we remove that and are able to get residential development out Route 90, we have potential cases, and we used a 300 home workforce housing example. We had to pick numbers, so we just said, look, if we get half the 300, that's a potential case. That's case 4 there, with the third bullet down. And if we have a best case, we have additional 300 homes, we'll get up to 224,000 gallons per day. Those are just so we could look at the economic models and say, what does it, what do these look like? So what do they look like? So this first slide just shows 2 cases. The first one is we get a new contract with Camden and Rockland. That's on the left-hand side, the 2 bars. And the next one over is we just build a WRRF within the town to cover that existing flow. No new flow, whether it's the new customers out Route 90 or additional customers out Route 90 with residential development. What you're looking at are a couple of different bar colors. The first one is in green. That's the revenue, or the cost, I'm sorry, associated with user rates. And the gray is the cost to a household, and I'll get to that in a minute, of debt service. So the total cost, as I mentioned earlier, was user rates plus debt service. And what this particular graph shows is what it would cost to an average residential home. So we call it per user, but it's really a household. So right now, if you look at year one on the far left, the total of user rates plus the debt service is about $1,350, $1,380, $1,380 per year that we're all paying on average for our wastewater treatment. And that comports actually with what I'm paying, so I can relate to that. The next one over is a 10-year case having to do with escalation and where we're going to end up if we think, if we're get a new contract with Camden and Rockland, somewhere around $1,900 a year would be our wastewater bill per household, okay? The next one over is the WRRF only, if we build our own and disconnect from Rockland and Camden. And you can see that it's not unsurprising, but in green, the user rates, they drop quite a bit. I told you earlier we're paying about 40% premium to go to Camden and Rockland. That's the reduction we're seeing because you operate your own system. You're not paying rent anymore. You're actually paying the cost of it. So the average user rates drop. So the green's lower. But you built a system. So you borrowed money. So the debt service goes up. So if we only build the WRRF and we don't expand it, we're going to end up at 10 years predictably just north of $2,000 per year per household versus slightly under that if we stayed with Camden and Rockland. So you can see that there's, that makes some intuitive sense. User rates go down, debt goes up, okay? So what happens if we expand out Route 90? We increase the pool of users, so we get, again, 3 different cases. The first one is we go out Route 90 past the high school to Route 17, we pick up main water, and we pick up 70% of the flow, the existing folks on Route 90. That's the middle case, year 1 and year 10. And you can see that in that particular case, we're somewhere equal to what we're paying today. But if you compare year 10, if we stick with Camden and Rockland, we're up around 1,900. If we just build the WRRF only and Route 90, but no new residential development, you're sitting a total of around, say, 1,350. So maybe it's $500 a year less if we do that, okay? And then if we do get development, additional homeowners out there and taxpayers, you can see the total costs continue to drop because as Brent mentioned, it doesn't really matter whether we're pumping 80,000 or 90,000 gallons a day or we're pumping 200. It's a single facility with 2 people and all the various chemicals that go along with it. The costs don't go up. I mean, they might barely, but it's really not a material issue. But with the additional users on the system, there's more people paying it down. So again, these are the average annual cost, total cost per household. So you can see how important the Route 90 development is if we can pull that together. So sort of summarizing the financials, constructing the WRRF and the Route 90 extension, which is that middle case, case 3, is really what we need to do to pick up those additional users to offset those costs on the user fees and the debt service. It's an important component of this. It's also a component, I think, of expanding the tax base. Now, I realize that some folks last night said that, well, if we have more people, we're going to have more services. But I think, in generally speaking, if we have more taxpayers, it lessens the upward pressure on those of us that are here now. Rockport is a large area with relatively low density, and taxes aren't going down. We all know that. We've seen that. So it's a tax management strategy long term. This isn't a tomorrow thing, but it's a 10, 20, 30-year issue. Our lack of cost and capacity control, fourth bullet, has led to higher rates relative to our neighbors. We're paying $500 to $1,000 more per household every year for this. That adds up. So it's a competitive disadvantage issue. And the last one, which is sort of a tertiary benefit to us, I also am on the Rockport Conservation Commission. I spend a lot of time in the summer sampling the water in the harbor and the lakes and the surrounding streams. And we have a bacteria issue. You all know about that. Probably it's Goody's Beach, okay? Goody's Beach is a stormwater issue mostly. It's not a sanitary wastewater issue, but it's the same concept. The Goose River brings bacteria. Every storm that the river turns a little milky, that's bringing bacteria with it. And embedded in that, those samples, are derivatives of pharmaceutical products and personal care products. You can measure detectable levels of caffeine derivatives and blood pressure medication derivatives. And that's not coming from the dogs and the seagulls. It's coming from leaking septics. Now, can you point to all of them on the ground? No. But as a general strategy, when we're discharging levels of bacteria containing those human indicator compounds, you know where it's coming from. So from a long-term perspective, getting more people off septic and onto the sanitary sewer is going to continue to improve water quality in the harbor. Is it an overnight issue? No, it isn't. But if you look at it today versus a strategy towards long-term connection of sanitary systems instead of using septics, in some cases many failing septics, it's an overall strategy to clean the water coming down the Goose and other tributary streams. We got a 2013 notice of violation from the EPA already. They already said your water quality in the harbor is unacceptable. You got to do something about it. So we spent the last 10 years investigating that, trying to figure out where it's coming from. In the case, mostly we've been worrying about Goodies Beach and the stormwater issues, and we haven't been able to figure that source out, but it's the same kind of thing. And what the next step from a notice of violation, or NOV as we called it back in my consulting days, the next step is a consent order. That's when the state or the feds come to you and say, okay, you had an NOV 10 years ago, you didn't do anything about it, so now we're going to do a consent order. Camden's got one of those. They don't like it. I don't blame them. They're not any fun. And they demand fines. They demand very specific actions. Consent orders are not free. They are very expensive. We don't want one. And if we can demonstrate through, part of this is that we start to reduce our long-term reliance on septics, that's a mitigating strategy towards trying to avoid that kind of thing. Is it guaranteed we're going to get a consent order? No, not yet. Sometimes they wait 20 years. Then they'll come back and say, what have you been doing? We sent them an update letter in 2020 saying, we're doing the best we can, because that's what we've done. But anyway, so from a long term, and that's a financial risk to us, okay? And I'm not saying it's going to immediately turn it off. I don't want to get anybody the impression that we're going to immediately solve an environmental problem by doing this. But this is just a helpful piece of it, sort of a tertiary benefit. So from a benefits perspective in general, what are we going to get as a community? We're going to see about a 40% reduction in our user rates. Debt service is going to go up, and depending on how many users we're able to add to the system, you saw the earlier economics of the benefit. And if we get the best case, it's $1,000 a year less per user, per household. That's real money. We eliminate the long-term risk we have to these cost escalations that Camden and Rockland are going to have to deal with. Neither one of their systems are in great shape. They're old. I mean, that's just what happens. So they keep them together as best they can. They start having violation issues. Camden's got a challenge on their hand, and they're going to have to invest a lot of money to fix it. They're starting to, but we haven't seen those escalations necessarily in our rates yet. Now, we've seen a 50% increase in rates over the last 3 or 4 years. That's not going to stop. It's not going to go down. And I understand that. So we get control over that. We also get control over our capacity needs. I talked about that already as far as a barrier to workforce housing out Route 90. If we can't give Camden more water or more wastewater, we're stuck. We can't do it. Again, long-term benefits to the surface water. And the other thing, too, is that siting this system at Penn Bay Medical may provide some benefit to them in the sense that they use 25 to 30,000 gallons of water coming out of Mirror Lake right now. That's their daily use. That 25 to 30,000 gallons converts into wastewater. So that's, what, a third of what we're using as a town? And that's a significant expense to them. Tyson Thornton just walked in the room. He's from Penn Bay Medical, so if anybody has questions of Tyson and their feelings about this, feel free to ask when we're finished. Sorry, Tyson, I didn't warn you. I was going to give him that. There's a potential for, and what's going on around the country, is you take some of the cleaned water. Brent talked about what happens to that water. It's drinkable at the end. That little joke I had at the very first slide was, why won't anybody drink this? I mean, I get why they won't, but it's that clean. It's not your dad's Oldsmobile, as the old saying went with respect to these old wastewater treatment plants. These new technologies literally put out crystal clear and clean water. So there's the potential for recycling some of that water into their use with respect to, boiler water or cooling water or irrigation or maybe flushing. And that's a significant expense to them, but in addition, it's a resilience thing for us. That hospital needs to keep operating. We rely on that. So if we have an upset condition in Mirror Lake, now we get all our drinking water from Mirror Lake. They pump it out of there all year long, and about August, the lake is down, so they start pumping out of Grassy, and they fill it up with water from Grassy. And it's not as clean as Mirror, but it's good enough, and they fill it up at the other end of the lake, so by the time it gets to the intake, it's in pretty good shape. And then they clean it through their membrane bioreactor. But they have they need to pump from a secondary source at the end of the summer because they're running out of water. Not running out, but the water's down 2 or 3 feet. They got to fill it back up again. So they do that. If we can lessen the burden on that, that's good for all of us. And secondarily, if there is an upset condition, a tanker truck rolls over with diesel fuel in it, and it messes up the water quality in the lake, if the hospital can use some of that recycled water in terms of their operations, that's a resilient strategy for a long-term thing. Is it an overnight issue? No, but it's something that we could build into the system, and it's being done around the country right now. So those are some of the benefit side of it. So we wondered about whether to tell you what we thought before we, asked you what you think. And we put this slide after the questions, and then we put it before it, and we left it in before. So what do we think as a task force? First bullet, we all think that Penn Bay Medical Center is the right place to put this thing. It's got, and using the Lincolnville technology, those flat tanks, one building kind of thing. The risk benefit to using Penn Bay is their old system, which sits right where their current stuff is I described earlier, and where we would put our system. There is a line, an outfall line, that goes from that area out to the shore. It's already in place. There's an existing right-of-way. It's big enough. It's not collapsed. Some of the folks at the Penn Bay Medical have already put a camera down there to make sure it was still intact, and it has been. They haven't cameraed the whole thing, but the stuff they've looked at has been fine. That line being there is like gold because it's already there to the shore. Now we have to extend it because in order to get a permit from the state, it has to be, the discharge point has to be at least 15 feet below mean low water. Now you're talking about the area kind of on the side of Glen Cove. It's really flat. So we have to go out a ways to get that deep, but that's a lot easier than trying to pound it through bedrock in somebody's property. So that outfall line is golden for us. Our second choice is Public Works, and again, the Lincolnville technology. The challenge we have, well, the advantage is it's shorter routing, so it's cheaper. I mean, I think you saw Brent said that it's $2 or $3 million less to go to Public Works. The risk we have at Public Works is there's nowhere to go with the outfall. We are across this Route 1, more or less by fresh off the farm, a little north of there. The only property across Route 1 headed to the ocean is all private. We don't have access there. We might be able to get it, but right now we don't have it. And if you come off of Route 1, it's flat, it's flat, flat. When you get to the shoreline right there, it's pretty steep. So then you have to figure out how to put a 6 or 8 inch high-density polyethylene plastic line through that area out to the ocean. And that may or may not be feasible. So that's a risk associated with pushing towards Public Works. So that's the reason that we're sort of looking at Penn Bay Medical amongst the resilience reason as well. And lastly, the Route 90 extension, we really need to complete it. It helps, there's long-term benefits to the, obviously, this project economics, as well as other economic and environmental benefits to Rockport, again, getting more people off of their septic systems over the years. This isn't an overnight thing. We're not going to flip a switch 5 years from now when this is built and have everything become great. But this is a long-term strategy, 10, 20-year kind of thing, even 30. So the next steps for us is, as a task force, we need to take input from you all. And we did again last night, did the same thing. And then we have to go to the select board next Monday night and provide our recommendation. And our recommendation, again, as you saw on the previous slide, is Penn Bay Medical and the Lincolnville technology. So that's at least where we're headed right now, but subject to this conversation. So that's the next step for Monday. And then in April, the board's going to meet and decide whether or not to put a ballot question out for June as to how to proceed with this and get the community's agreement. So those are our next steps once we get done with this. So the next part of it is feedback. We'd like to hear from you, what you're thinking, what your concerns are, what your questions might be, suggestions you have. And I don't know, Denise, you want to, provide any input? I mean, we've got a big elephant in the room here, okay? The elephant in the room is Camden. And we've had an agreement with Camden for 30 years. And again, as I mentioned, the task force, we have stayed aware of what's been going on. We haven't been involved in it. So I'd like Denise to say a few words about what she's been going through relative to trying to get that particular agreement reconstituted and some of the challenges associated with it. As I mentioned, we have rates issues, we have capacity issues, and they have their own concerns. So Denise, why don't you provide your input?
Excuse me, I'll be brief on this, but last night a question was asked, well, can't you just do mediation? Work it out with Camden. And it made us realize, and we heard comments from other people last night, that we should have addressed this question earlier in the process rather than wait until the end of the public comment period, just to give people some background. The agreement with Camden expired in 2020. We have worked hard, have tried to talk with Camden, have tried to discuss terms to move forward with Camden. We did actually have a court-supported mediation last April and May with Camden. The mediator were sort of in separate Zoom rooms, and the mediator's on Zoom. So the mediator first came to the Rockport Zoom room and said, so are we talking about a long-term agreement, or is this a divorce? And we said, we hope it's a long-term agreement. We're here to talk about a long-term agreement. And the mediator said thanks and went into the other Zoom room with Camden, and about 10 minutes later came back and said, it's a divorce. And for anybody who's been in a relationship and one party wants out, it's awfully hard for the other party to stay in that relationship. We still, heard those words in April, came up with an agreement with Camden for the sort of reasonable future to work with Camden. They sort of backed out of those terms without discussing it with us. They just went to their select board and sort of turned course from what we thought was a mutually agreed upon way of moving forward. I've had many, I think, coffees, meetings with various Camden Select Board. I truly believe in the benefit to both towns of us working together whenever we can. And I've come to I guess I'd say the reluctant conclusion, I'll never say never, and I'll keep working on it, but I think this particular issue is extraordinarily complex. Camden's got a very old plant that needs a lot of upgrades. And I think last night I used the analogy of a '64 Chevy. Anybody who's owned an old car and keeps repairing it and never gets it in as good a shape as a new car would be, and maybe spends more money in the long run. So that's, sort of have to factor that in. Camden's been doing a lot of work on their system in the Pearl Street and Free Street areas, and they've discovered that a lot of their old sewer pipes are essentially cardboard. And they also have discovered that they have underground streams flowing into their treatment plant. So the more we work with them, the more we buy their problems. And I think maybe fortunately we've learned enough to understand what we might be getting into. We've heard from some Camden residents saying, take a rate from Camden, but don't try to be a partner with Camden in their plant, because they have a lot of issues. Rockport, our sewer rates are high, partly because we've done a really good job over the years of keeping our system well maintained. And again, I know I haven't reached a conclusion. We're gonna have our select board meeting on Monday. I've got some further discussions with some Camden folks, but I wanted to give you a flavor. We have tried and tried to work with Camden, really just wanting a fair rate. Another issue here is that the rate we are currently paying to Camden is what I call their rack rate. It's what every Camden homeowner pays. Rockport, for its volume of 65,000 gallons going to Camden, pays the same rate as any homeowner in Camden. That results in us paying 25% of Camden's wastewater budget when we represent about 7% of the total inflow. And we have worked, part of our discussions with them, one, we would like an agreement, but we also think it's fair to start talking about what a fair rate would be for our users. Now, I think Megan and the calculations used here have just assumed the Camden rack rate, so we can sort of see how those play out long-term. But that's just some background on where things stand from our attempt to work with Camden on this issue. And again, I believe strongly in working with Camden when we can, but when you get into this particular wastewater issue, we've just found that very difficult.
Yep, thank you. For questions, I'd like you to come up to the mic if you wouldn't mind, and because this is being streamed and recorded, so if you wouldn't mind, let us know who you are and fire away.
I'm Jan Rosenbaum. I live a couple of blocks from here. I have two questions. One is for Sam. Tell me why, as a committee, you did not go for the filtering system as opposed to the system that you did go for. Why not go for the microfiber? And second, for the engineering company, did you even do a back-of-the-envelope calculation to add into the capacity that we would build enough so that we could rent space to Camden and be the landlord rather than the tenant someday? Because they're very likely to come to the conclusion sometime that it might be cheaper to rent from us than it is to rebuild their entire system from scratch. And maybe we should build enough capacity to handle theirs as well.
Yeah, all right, Ramon, there we go. All right, so the first part of that, how did we end up with the SAGB versus membrane? A lot of it had to do with operational complexity. It's a much simpler system. Membrane technology is fantastic if you have very specific requirements of your discharge. Oxford, they're heading into the top of a river that already had treatment plants further downstream, so they couldn't add to the pollution. It had to be incredibly clean to come in. The plant that I ran 15 years ago it was at a biofuels plant. We had genetically modified organisms in our process wastewater that couldn't go out. The membrane made sure that didn't happen. So when it is required from your discharge, it is an amazing technology, but it is very operationally complex. It requires a lot of understanding on how to keep that system running that most wastewater operators don't currently have. And then the other piece of it is kind of the membrane or the filtration media itself. In SAGB, it is specified gradations of, but is basically gravel and rocks. The membrane filters are thermoplastics that are covered in Teflon. So the production of those requires the use of PFAS. They also are required to be thrown away every 10 to 15 years, and how that happens is also an issue. So not requiring to have that highest level of water clarity on our discharge, and I will say with the SAGB, it is still very clean as it comes out through. It was just a much better choice in terms of how we were going to use it. Secondly, when it came to whether or not we were going to add more capacity in, and that is part of it with expansion versus the other piece of it, but it was also why we had actually evaluated sites on the southern end of town. It had more to do with what Rockland was doing. We knew their system was getting older. They were also going to need that piece, so having the ability to be able to be a neighbor on that side and take some of that flow in when they design their new system helps with them, helps us in terms of being able to, like you said, be a little bit more of a landlord, but it also kind of helps the overall system in the area. If Rockland needs to be able to move more flow over, we can take some of it, same vice versa. And ultimately, if we could work with Camden too, being able to have all three of these towns kind of match together and being able to kind of work together if there's a big problem with one facility, being able to move water all the way over and across. So in general, we haven't had discussions with either of those pieces, but it was in our mind in terms of how we were looking at it, where we wanted to site it, and how we sized it.
Oh, I'm going to go to the back of the room first. Peter, she had her hand up earlier.
Sorry.
It's all right.
New knee, so I'm still living. Barring the,
A little closer. There you go.
is that better?
Perfect.
Setting aside the new potential construction along Route 90, what percentage of folks in Rockport are on the sewer system now, and how will that increase, or will that increase if we go with your recommendation?
So it's about a third of the town right now, unless I'm going to be disabused of that notion, but that's about a third of the town. Certainly, if we do the Route 90 expansion, it would increase, and you could see the flow increases. We were currently at 89,000 gallons per day. Under the best-case scenario, which we're not sitting here saying is going to happen, but under that particular scenario, that's 224,000 gallons per day, so that's almost tripling, all right? More likely, we're going to see that 120 to 130,000 gallon as the folks out on Route 90 past the high school hook up, but we should see flows that hit the 120 to 130 range.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Follow-up. But for those of us who are not out on Route 90, who are, say, up South Street or up Beach Hill, how does that work?
So here's the next thing. We as a town haven't yet had a comprehensive strategic plan on how to expand our sanitary sewer system. It doesn't exist. It exists in a lot of different heads. Nobody's like completely ignoring it. But as a bunch of volunteer task force, we originally said, well, what do we have? And the answer is we don't. So actually, Bob Colmar at the end there has been starting to work on that in terms of, you know, all right, where should we go next? Mm-hmm. And one of those discussion points was with Maine Water, because in theory, we should kind of overlay each other. Now, there are a few homes, I know of one in particular, that they're on public water, but they're not on public sewer. But that's not the norm. So the concept would be, all right, if Maine Water is expanding, how should we expand to go along with that? And what makes the most sense? I'll give you another example. Right now, the sanitary sewer line north of Grafham's ends around Grove Street. The Y and the landfill pump water goes directly to Camden. Right now, if we build the plant, we can't take water from either the Y or the landfill. The landfill currently goes to the plant in Camden at, again, a very high rate. That costs the four towns that deal with the landfill about $400,000 a year in disposal fees of groundwater that the landfill has to pump by order from an environmental perspective from now until, you know, the cows come home forever. Now, if we're able to hook that up, in other words, if we expanded that line, would it be a cost-effective expansion for us to go up to the Y in the landfill to capture that flow? That's a question we have to answer. We had some stuff come up the other night of whether or not we should take Samoset. I mean, that's a bunch of residential, big residential community right now goes directly to Rockland. And in our current scenario, we're not looking at connecting the Samoset in because we're not sure it's cost effective. But have we truly gone through all of those very detailed calculations to say we should expand here and this is the right reason why? No, it's part of this strategic plan that we're in the middle of that we're kind of doing in parallel. Now your next question would be then, okay, how does that affect the capacity of the plant, right? So these are kind of modular things to where you just, if you need more capacity, you just add a module. Now, it's not quite that simple, but that's in effect what it is.
So in other words, it's the Lego of sewer systems?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And you just make it a little bit bigger. And so with that in mind, we have to consider the footprints of the properties that we're going to potentially build on and whether or not from a modular perspective, can we expand these things? It affects pipe diameters.
And is that same modular consideration part of the strategic plan for hooking folks up who are currently have wells and septic systems?
Absolutely. That's part of it. But again, that's sort of a longer-term strategic plan thing. I say longer-term, and we're working on it.
Yeah, and what is that longer term?
For the plan, I would like to be able to say 6 months, maybe a year. I mean, we've met with Maine Water, and we've said, all right, where are you now? Because we kind of have a sense for that, but not like every house. Where are you now, and where are you going? What do you see from a commercial market perspective? Because they're interested in doing something that's cost-effective for their own business. So where are you going to be heading? And so Bob is in those conversations with them. And, you know, just getting their maps and getting our maps and getting them crammed onto one, you know, base that says, okay, here's this, here's that, you know, and then what's it going to take to, you know, expand. That's the exercise we have to go through, and we are going through it. It's not been ignored. It's just a parallel track.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Can I ask a question on the similar subject?
Absolutely.
On something else.
Come on up.
Those of you who don't know me, I'm Alex Armentrout. I live in Rockport, have for decades.
Or even snap it out of there. I don't care.
It's the easier part.
Perfect.
We spend a significant amount of money to extend the sewer line down Route 1 to connect parts of the town that were not connected before to Rockland. My understanding is that there are a significant number of properties along that corridor that are not on the sewer system. Is that true?
Can you address that, Orion? Or we haven't looked at that specifically. I know it's a related issue, but we haven't.
Well,
as a
the
task force
second
looked at that.
question, which is related to that one, is as a result of having invested that money, what have we gained in terms of sewer customers, in terms of numbers?
There's two components to that.
Right.
If, under town ordinance, if the line passes in front of your property, you are obligated to pay debt service.
And does that extend to properties that maybe start at Route 1 and go to the water? Because most of them do along that line.
That's outside our bucket, as far as what we have been looking as a task force, but okay.
It does. So it doesn't matter at this point whether all those properties along the water side of Route 1 are actually hooked up or not. They're paying anyway. Is that correct? With the extension of the line?
They're paying debt service. Yeah. He's going to get you the mic.
If they have land frontage, buildable land frontage on the road, then they're paying debt service.
So that should mean that we have a significant number of customers now as compared to 2 years ago along there?
Correct. We added about 250 equivalent users by doing that extension. Correct. And to add on to that, the way our model is set up now, we did not have a lot of users actually connect to the system. We probably had 10 or less actually connect to the system. Currently, with the way our model is set up, that kind of works in our favor, that we have more people contributing with the debt service.
Right.
But we're not sending
We
250
don't have to
equivalent
pay to have
users to have it
septic
treated,
treated.
right?
Okay, thank you. I have other questions, but I will reserve them until you get on to another subject.
We may be on to another subject. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, all. Peter Alston. I live here in Rockport. I've got a business here in Rockport, and I've been really, really interested in this throughout. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a little photographer. I'm not an engineer or any of this, but it's of great interest to me, and I care deeply about Rockport. I care deeply about Camden and this community we're in. So I know how hard you guys have tried to engage Camden. And you use you refer to the mediation where they come back with, nope, it's a divorce. And, but people can change their minds. And I know how hard all of you have worked. I salute the work you've done. I know how hard you've been trying, Denise, in getting Camden. They're not the bad guys. They really are not, but getting them to the table. And my interest in this, my concern is that I don't want to say we're rushing to a vote in June, and where we get a choice, is it the hospital, is it Public Works, wherein I don't think we've really fully played, I don't know, is it a Hail Mary, trying to get through to Camden? A number of us watched the December Camden Select Board video. That was really interesting because I wasn't hearing, and a lot of us weren't hearing divorce. For the first time, I started hearing them say, the Select Board, they weren't all there, but there were those who were acknowledging, you know, we really don't know as much as we should know. We should, they were talking about partnerships, you know, wherein heretofore it's been Rockport's the client, you know, and they're providing the service and we're the client. But even, you know, the head of their select board and others, we're talking about partnerships. And I think for us, and that was a really cool idea, Jan, you know, the one we just heard about, okay, build it and they will come. You know, God knows if that makes any sense whatsoever, but it's an interesting concept. To summarize, you know, I'm too lengthy in these things, but, you know, if we get a choice of, you know, the hospital or public works, it seems to me we're missing an opportunity at the end. I didn't smell or hear divorce. With the current Camden Select Board, I heard, let's have a workforce, let's have workshops, let's partner. You know, it seemed like something of a sea change, and I know how hard you guys are working to pursue this. I just hope we don't lose sight of there's more than option A or option B. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
My name is Eric Lautzen. I have Danica Candle that works out on Route 90. And I unfortunately have 700 feet of road frontage. And the debt service is kind of concerning to me, particularly since I got approved in 1991 to build that building. And at that time, they determined your septic based on the size of the building and not how many workers you might have. Only once that I can think of had more than 10. And I have a septic system that was geared for 60 people. So if you look at the building and you see there's a field on the right-hand side, that field is basically a cement chambered septic system. You can't build on that, you know, so I'm concerned about the debt part of this, how much it's going to cost me. I haven't seen any figures in terms of that. Also wondering if this goes in, is there that much usable land? I know there's some problems with wetlands along Route 90, and a lot of that land is developed commercially at this point. You know, for the workforce housing, is there going to actually be that much usable land out on Route 90? And I guess, let me see if I have taken notes here. Yeah, the other thing is, just out of curiosity, there's that village zone that Richard Remsen and Richard Arno had not developed but proposed, but it is in the zoning ordinance. Will it connect to that?
Orion,
because there's potential for housing in there.
Yeah, okay, I'm on. Yeah, so the that particular development that is proposed to connect to it, they've got a few phases. Their first phase, which is right next to Budding View, I think they did a land swap with you.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
so,
they have that.
Yeah, that was
so
an
they
easier
have a driveway up to Park Street.
Yeah,
the state didn't like where the Park Street ends up now.
Yeah, it was a little harder to get sewer back up Park Street over to them, so that led to the land swap to get to Route 90 so that they could have access to it.
Yeah,
and then that
I'm
leads
such a
back.
Nice guy, I did it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yes, there'll be some housing units within that first phase, and then the second phase will have more housing that they're proposing.
In the village zone itself, yeah. That's good to hear.
Yes.
But anyway, if somebody can answer that question for me, and what do I do with my septic system? You know, just haul it away or what? So.
Yeah, I think that the only thing I understand your question. As a task force, we were tasked with looking at technology and location and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't lost on us that the some of the burden would be carried by new users out Route 90 past the high school because of the way the ordinances are written. We've talked a little bit and are continuing to try and figure out whether or not that is a shared expense more broadly than just the Route 90, occupants, if you will. There are some barriers to that in terms of, available funding, and grants require that you put the burden on the users and not the general population. There may be some ways to kind of work around that, but your concern is not lost on us. And so it's something we've been talking about. And the whole financial modeling of this project, you've seen the way the economics look, but there's details in there, and we'll probably look to even potentially share some of that more broadly before an election date, so we understand it better and you'll understand it better as well. So I do understand exactly what you're talking about.
And back in 1991, when I started building that, Route 90 was torn apart, and there was a lot of talk about putting sewer in at that time. It's too bad they didn't. Would have saved me a lot of money with that septic system that I had to install. For 50, 60 people. Okay, well,
Understood.
I am a resident of Rockland, so I will try not to take showers after 10 o'clock, okay?
Beautiful.
For the time being.
That'll make Tyson very happy.
I didn't realize there was an issue there.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Come on up. Right here first.
Two areas of discussion. First of all, the subject of Rockport Harbor and the problems that have been addressed, are being addressed there, comes up. I understand that the concept that the problems are emanating from residential properties. So my question is, if that's the case, and we have sewer in Rockport Village, why has that been allowed to continue? Why is it that either the people's, I mean, theoretically, it must be coming from septic systems in the village. It's not coming from West Rockport or even where I am, which is immediately adjacent to, but not in the village. So I don't understand why that hasn't been able to be addressed already.
I can talk to that because I'm actually the other hat that I wear. Back when this was originally discovered is the wrong word.
Several years ago.
Yeah, 2009, 10, 11,
Yeah,
12, and then it led to the NOV in 2013.
Right.
There was a ton of effort made to look at all the individual homes in that area as to whether or not they were connected, right? That's the work that Bob Kennedy had been doing.
Right.
And it was inconclusive. When we had sewage sniffing dogs, we had dye testing, we had cameras, and who smokes, who doesn't. I mean, all this kind of thing, saying to ourselves, how in the devil are we getting this discharge of bacteria in the storm drain right adjacent to Goodies Beach? We've mapped the storm drain lines.
Right.
There's essentially stuff coming down from Amesbury in one area, and then it's coming up from the southern area along Pascal. They're two different tracks of the storm system. Both of them culminate in a single manhole each on Pascal before they join to go underneath and out to the outfall, the discharge point. Both those manholes are equally contaminated with bacteria. So it's not as if it's just generally ubiquitous in there. We have, the latest version of what we're trying to do is to see whether or not the manholes themselves are actually incubating the bacteria during the summer in between rainstorms. In other words, it's there naturally. It then gets into the sumps.
I could make an analogy, but I won't.
Yeah, probably not, right? But the other interesting thing, and this is really off topic, but I'm going to mention it anyway, is that we have a high school student, Henry McDivitt, has come up with an idea of flying an infrared camera drone over the harbor in the, let's say, April, May, before the leaves come out time frame, to start looking for warmer waters entering into the harbor. This is a high school kid, right? And we actually were trying to do a test flight a couple days ago, but it was crummy weather. So it's not lost on us as far as what's going on, but the solution isn't staring us in the face.
Okay.
Now, the Goose River also contributes a considerable loading of bacteria. It has nothing to do with the storm problem that we've got at Goodies Beach. And so we sample that Goose River at, storm system times and routinely see exceedance of bacteria levels in the Goose above the elevation of the water, so above the waterfall, if you will. So that's coming down from the west. It's not, something that's floating back up from the harbor itself. So we still have those issues. And it's a long-term thing that we've got to address. And so it's not lost on us. Folks that were here last night want to talk about Glen Cove because they've got bacteria issues there as well. So it's an issue that the Conservation Commission has squarely right on our forehead. We have a sampling budget every year that we spend to try and understand that better, and we're working on it, but there's no obvious solution or no obvious cause.
Well, all right. I know it's been the subject of discussion for some period of time.
Yeah, and it hasn't been shelved.
Oh, okay. So in the presentation, there was talk about how the operating expenses of this system would be met. There was a whole lot less discussion about how the system would be financed. And I'm curious, there must be available state and or federal funds for this sort of thing, and yet that hasn't been brought up at all. I mean, for years and years and years, every time there's a state ballot and a state bond issue, it includes septic treatment systems for this and that and every other community. Where does that fit into this thing?
So I'll answer briefly, and then I'm going to ask an expert to step in. We literally met at 1 o'clock today over in the town office going, all right, what are our options on financing? So with that, Brent, you want to touch, or Orion, either one?
Or Megan.
Or Megan.
I'll talk real quick just about some grants that we're looking at, and a very conservative approach. You're not always going to get every single grant, but right now we're looking at about. Huh? And money we already have. So we already have a decent amount of money. We have $2 million, but we're pursuing another $3 to $5 million from different grant agencies that can go into this. That's the max that we could go for on these grant agencies.
But when you say grants, right?
Oh, you couldn't hear me back there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me better now?
I could hardly hear you.
Okay, so we're pursuing other grants. We already have about $2 million for this project, and we're pursuing anywhere from 3 to an additional $5 million. So.
But
And none of this assumed that.
aren't there specific state bonds dedicated to this type of project that we would have access to? Or is it like the schools where everybody else gets money and we don't?
So there is a clean water program, they call it a Clean Water SRF program through the state, which we've done most of our sewer projects through. The grant application period for that is coming back up. It's been hard to try to secure those funds without having a clear direction forward, whether we're continuing in the agreements that we're in or we are truly building our own plant. So when applying for these things, it's hard for people to say, yes, we're going to allocate money to you, even though you don't know what option you're picking yet. And I think that once we have a clear direction forward, we'll become a lot more competitive in those. Especially when it comes to like earmarks, our senatorial earmarks. So long as the litigation and we have a clear path forward, all of that is resolved, I think we'll become a lot more competitive in that.
Do you have any notion as to what the interest rates would be on that type of money at this point in time?
So when I did the estimates, I estimated at 8.5%, trying to be on the high side, looking at the current market that we're in. In the Clean Water SRF program, they do offer reduced rate loans from market rate for projects such as this. We also have options.
3.5%, right?
So that's USDA. We have USDA options that would offer us a rate around 3.5%. So the estimates that we put into our cost models are kind of purposefully high because we didn't want to sell a project that made it look better than it is. We wanted to be more realistic in our approach.
So did I hear you right? Did you say 8.5%?
That's the estimates that I used, yep.
Well, I can tell you this, if you could get 8.5, if as a buyer of municipal bonds, if I could get 8.5%, I'd be in clover.
So, well, we did it on purpose. We didn't want to artificially make our loan payments low. So,
No, I understand
like you
that, but
were
I'm just saying that, you know, of course, the timing is not ideal, but
I mean,
just,
in relation to that, the Route 1 project that we just did, our interest rate on that was 1.25%.
yeah, I know,
Yeah, I think-
that's right.
I think what Megan's saying is, you know, she deliberately used higher numbers, more conservative numbers, so that nobody would be accused of making it look like a better deal than it was. But in what's ended up happening is it looks like a worse deal than it really is, because at 3.5%, which is what we understand from Brent, we can expect to get from the USDA.
That is more reasonable, and
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
all right, the other thing is this. I know that user fees are supposed to help carry the cost of this project, but the capital cost is going to be spread across the town, right?
So the capital cost is what your debt service fee is. So on your bill, you have two charges.
I don't have a bill, so that's why I'm
So
interested.
if you got a bill, you would have two charges. You would have a user rate charge, which
Right.
is based on solely your usage of the system. And then you have a debt service charge, which is based on how many equivalent users the code enforcement officer assigns to your property. And you're charged a rate for that, which covers all of our capital expenses, including debt. So upgrades to current pump stations, continuing debt, line replacements, any capital improvements are covered by that debt service fee.
And the sewer system, anyone not on the sewer system will not pay any of this.
Not in front of, in
It's
other
not
words-
going to be part of the mill rate?
No.
No.
Not any of it?
No.
Okay.
I knew you'd ask that question.
That's refreshing. Okay.
Yeah. Who wants to pay
All right,
their
one final question along the same lines. So when you talk about grant money, are you talking about federal and state money, or are you talking about some other type of grant money? That's a little bit fuzzy.
Okay, both. So there's an agency that's both federal and state, but we're pursuing both options. There's a few state options that we're currently drafting up, and then there's one federal one that's a little harder to get, but we're still going to pursue it. They're familiar with the project, they understand the project, and it's been on the radar.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's grab it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Pio. I resident of Rockport, formerly chaired the Economic Development Committee and was on the Planning Board. And the one thing I just wanted to address really quick, partly to piggyback on one of Peter's comments, was, you know, what if we are able to work something out with Camden? And that's great, but the problem is there's no room for expansion. And I just want to address the topic of housing, because we have a housing crisis in the state right now. It's not just here, it's everywhere. You know, there are numbers being thrown around the state. I was at a state real estate conference in Portland last week. And as a state right now, we need to add roughly 80,000 homes in the state, new homes. And we're going to need that everywhere, up and down the coast, interior Maine, southern Maine, you name it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, how you want to look at it, when it comes to our general mid-coast area right here, Rockport has the bulk of the available land when it comes to where we can build housing. And if we're going to help try to make a dent in this housing crisis, we're going to need sewer capacity. When you have sanitary sewer, it allows you to build at higher densities than when you have septic. And in order to make development numbers feasible for a developer, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, affordable or market rate, density is going to provide the greatest level of efficiencies to allow those projects to pencil. And so that means, you know, not single-family homes. Right now, as you get out on Route 90, the lot standard changes to, you know, 1 house per 3 acres, or, you know, the best you'll get is 1 house per 1 acre. Well, all that's going to do is contribute to sprawl, and we're going to end up seeing the periphery of Rockport sort of carved up into single-family lots, when we could be building, you know, townhomes, apartments, or mixed-use communities of single-family homes, apartments, townhomes, condos, whatever. And that's the best way we can make a dent in starting to solve this housing crisis that we have, to provide housing for our teachers, our municipal workers, restaurant workers, and all of the people that are coming to Maine. And this was a big theme of the conference I was at last week. We've all seen the trends here. Those trends are only going to continue, and they're going to accelerate. Climate refugees are coming to Maine. That's not going to reverse. And you know, Rockport is going to be a place people want to land. And to the extent that we can expand housing in a responsible and sustainable and a resilient manner, I think this first expansion of the sewer is a great way of getting us there. To other points about how do we service other lots around town, I think that's the next wave of a sewer comprehensive plan, which will allow us to look at what other areas can be opened up for housing as well. And we really would ideally be able to fill in the town with sewer, which will open up a lot of these other parcels around town for housing, so that it's not just out along Route 90 or down Route 1, and will really make for a more cohesive community with more walkability and things like that. So there's a lot of reasons to do this, and I just wanted to sort of put that out there. So thanks.
Thank you, David. Anyone else? Peter? Are you, okay.
Don't encourage me. Bill McClellan, and I live in the village, and you guys all know me. I send you emails all the time about high sewer bills. But I am really impressed with the work that's been done here. I read through everything, and it's really, I didn't realize this was all going on. And about a month ago, I sent you guys an email, but this is really impressive. And makes a lot of sense. My question is about debt service. And it feels a little onerous as a user to be paying the full load here. But my question is, how long is debt service typically? Are we talking 30-year loans? Are we talking 15-year loans? How long, I mean, are my grandchildren's grandchildren going to be paying for this? How long is this going to go on? Thanks.
Typically we do 30-year loans, and when I structure these, I typically do level principal payments because you end up paying less interest over time. So we're really mindful on trying to make sure that we're paying as little as possible to borrow the money that we're borrowing to do these projects.
And remember, just to add to that, this graph that's up on the screen now, I think, yep, it includes user rates and debt service from a comparative perspective. So it's not like this is on top of what you're already seeing here. So this Route 90 development middle graph, if you will, includes that long-term debt service that's attributable solely to the users or the folks that are fronting the line itself. It does not include any general revenues for the rest of the town.
My question was just related to what would it be in year 20 and year 30?
Sure.
So are we looking at level, or are we looking at going down? I'm assuming level.
Yeah, I can tell you what year 1 and year 10 look like. Others?
If there, I would like to just interject and thank this task force. They have done, these are professionals in their work life who did this kind of work, and they were volunteers. And I know they spent hundreds of hours on this project. So I'd just like to really thank them for bringing their expertise to the benefit of the town. And as you've seen, and as people have said, they just did an amazing job in making this clear and understandable as to what's being proposed here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll be here all week. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right.
My
question?
Oh, there we go.
Come on up.
Just one more thing about the timing. I wonder if June is maybe a bit too soon in what Peter said about Camden and Rockport dialoguing about this. When the 30-year contract was made back in the 80s, Camden and Rockport were having conflict about use, and two citizens groups got together and formulated a solution that was presented to the Camden Select Board, and this it eventually was approved and worked very, very well until just as the contract was running out and Rockport stopped paying a little portion of the rent. This conflict between the two towns talking started up again, and it was also the beginning of COVID when everything stopped for a while. And I agree with Peter about it sounded as if they're open to some kind of dialogue, and that maybe if we could postpone all of the voting in June until November and continue to work on that, because I still have the impression that it could do big benefit to both towns to be using the same system, and environmentally to have three major wastewater treatment plants draining into the bay in this little section of the mid-coast seems a lot. So if the vote could be waited on.
Thanks, Sally.
Others? Fire away.
Hi, I'm Vicki Boach, and I must be a glutton for punishment because I was here last night.
So were we.
And you were too. And I had to take home what I heard last night and sleep on it for a while, and then to also encourage one of my compatriots at the village at Rockport to attend as well. Anyway, I'm a maniac. I grew up in the mid-coast. I became educated, went away, came back, and I'm happy to be back here. I saw what happened with the dialogue between Camden and Rockport and Rockland in regards to the building of Penn Bay Medical Center. I love Penn Bay Medical Center. I grew up there. I grew up on South Street. My mother and my dad both were into ecologically correct conservation of the area. And I just don't get it, why we can't get that dialogue, as she said, going again with Camden and Rockland. And if this line needs to go out Route 90, that's great. So I hope that the dialogue will continue, as she said, and this can be postponed as far as a vote so that the general public can understand it a little bit better. And to me, that figure that you folks put up is pretty hard for me to wrap my brain around. What was it, $26 million? And this project won't be going forward for a few more years. Anyway, that's what I have to say. Thank you. And thanks for all the great work you've done. I love living in Rockport. I'm glad to be back here.
Thank you.
Can you come to the mic, please? Is that you?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Just wondering if there's some way that I can find out a rough estimate of what my debt service bill will be at some point?
Do you know how many equivalent users Danica Candles is currently listed as?
I have no idea. One?
One.
That's me.
The other 60 don't.
I don't even let them go
You're
to the
in.
bathroom in the
Number
building.
You can wash your hands, you can, as many
Right.
times as you want, just.
That's right. 'Cause
Yeah.
we're hooked up to the municipal water.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we are. But
Yeah. No, thankfully, it's not, the size of the building isn't the issue, so. We've modernized how we look at these things. Thank
Yeah, I know,
goodness.
thank goodness.
Isn't that a
But
good thing?
after I paid, many thousands of dollars for the system.
It's a day late and a dollar short, but.
Yeah, right.
At least we got there at some point.
Well, at least I have your empathy. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you'll be able to continue to use your system up until it fails. You won't have to connect to the system until your septic system fails.
But I'll still be paying the debt service.
The debt
Correct.
service.
Right.
But you won't have a
Right.
usage charge.
And unfortunately, like I said before, I have a lot of frontage on the road. But it's not necessarily a usable frontage. I have the septic system is on a good part of the, what appears to be usable land, but.
But to your benefit, it's one lot, so it's just one.
One equivalent user, not based on.
Oh, okay, it's not based on, oh, okay.
You'll pay the
In
same as
Rockland,
anybody
I
else
know
along.
they wanted, they based it on road frontage.
Okay.
Yeah, that was simple, I
Yeah.
guess, yeah. Well, thank you very much, yeah.
Thanks, Eric.
And we'd love to see some housing and workplace housing in Rockport, because I was on the planning board in Rockland for 37 years, and chairman for 34, and we have a lot of housing. We approved a 50-unit senior housing project on Maverick Street across from Dead River. And they're starting to work on that, and that's for 50 and older crowd, but.
It's nobody here.
Yeah, right. Almost everybody here. Okay. So glad to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. And I don't want to belabor the point on the housing, but we got some interesting data last night from Amanda Dwelly, who's been working on some sort of workforce housing, senior issues. And she sort of reports that in 2010, in Knox County, there were 3 seniors for every 10 working age person. In 2020, there were 5 seniors for every 10 working age person. They're projecting in 2030 there would be 7 seniors for every 10, and by 2040 it would increase up to 7.5 seniors. So we're an aging community. The kindergarten experienced a 40% drop in enrollment this last September, and I think vibrant schools and vibrant young families are what we want to have in this community, and I think workforce housing is key to that. So.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
you
you,
coming
everyone.
out.
Thanks, you guys.